All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, in a new interview with New York Magazine, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reflects on her first year in office and lays out her particular philosophy of change. That profile by David Friedlander is aptly headlined, "1 year in Washington, AOC reshaped her party agenda, resuscitated Bernie Sanders' campaign, and hardly has a friend in town." AOC, of course, didn't come to Washington to make friends, and the fact that she's viewed poorly by her corporatist colleagues should be a badge of honor. It actually kind of blows my mind that AOC's only been in Washington for 1 year, given what a massive new force of gravity she's created within the Democratic Party. What struck me most, though, was both her self-awareness and her far-sighted view of politics. And most members of Congress are honestly just trying to live through the next news cycle and fundraising quarter end. Fixated on the day-to-day Washington battles, they flit in a reactionary way from issue to issue, from outrage to outrage, hoping that their constant repositioning and efforts to win the minor skirmishes of the day will be sufficient to allow them to hold on to their seats. For most, just holding on to that seat or maybe positioning themselves for higher office is the extent of their aspirations. AOC, though, she's a little bit different. We saw that, of course, from the beginning when she first arrived in Washington and joined other climate activists at a sit-in of Speaker Pelosi's office. This new profile offers some additional color on that pivotal moment, according to Friedlander. Other squad members were supposed to come as well, but ultimately backed out. Her aides were frantically nervous that this was, in fact, a terrible idea. AOC herself says she was terrified, adding, "I learned a lot about how fear shapes the decisions of elected officials. I know this could be bad, and this could make someone mad, and I don't know exactly how they would drop the hammer on me or what hammers would be dropped. It felt like the right thing to do, and when you say that, people think it's a form of naivete and that it's childish, but I don't think it was." We see now how AOC is different as well. While her colleagues are trying to figure out the safest response to rapidly unfolding events in Iran, AOC knew exactly how this moment fit into her broader worldview, tweeting, "War is a class conflict too. The rich and powerful who open war escape the consequences of their decisions. It's not their children sent into the jaws of violence. It's often the vulnerable, the poor, and working people who had little to no say in conflict who pay the price. Frickin' men." AOC's understanding of the long game, of how pushing previously radical ideas into the conversation can dramatically shift what's possible, of how much Washington consensus is driven by a desire not to be uncomfortable or to make other people uncomfortable. That understanding has handed her power and influence that exceeds nearly anyone, to include the Speaker of the House. In a short period of time, AOC's challenged and vexed both parties. Not only has she fought with Democratic Party leadership and pressured wavering Democrats to embrace the bold vision of her Green New Deal, she's also educated some of her supporters who may have initially loved her for her trailblazing identity, but have been a bit challenged and moved by her populist class-based politics. On the right, of course, AOC's triggered a full meltdown, complete with hilarious freakouts over her clothes or her dances or whether she allowed a staffer to eat a hamburger. Those on the right who believe that yelling, "You're a socialist," should cause Democrats to instantly melt into a pool of shame and self-loathing have absolutely no idea what to do with her. How could it be that AOC attracts adoring crowds everywhere, from New York City to Council Bluffs, Iowa? How could it be that she so dominates the conversation online that she is the fourth most tweeted about politician in the entire world? This new profile also reveals just how AOC understands this moment that we're all living through now. Yesterday, we covered her self-evidently accurate statement that in most countries, she and Biden wouldn't even be in the same party. But what really caught my eye was this comment. "This whole primary is going to be about the soul of the Democratic Party. I think it's a referendum on whether we think everything was fine before Trump. People who live in a lot of privilege, who think of public programs as charity, they often think there was nothing wrong before Trump. They think Hillary was the problem, but it's much deeper than that." Exactly right. Finally, we have at least a handful in Washington who are willing to fight for the soul of the party, to fight for the multiracial working class of America, even if it means getting a chilly reception in the marble halls of Congress. If you listen to news coverage of D.C., you'll hear over and over that nothing gets done in this town. Gridlock, logjam, division. This, in many ways, is actually a mirage. It appears true only because on the things that you would actually want them to do, there is no action. But Democrats overwhelmingly found it in their bipartisan hearts to back Trump's military budgets. They reauthorized the Patriot Act. They voted nearly unanimously in the Senate to ratchet up the sanctions on Iran, assisting the Trump admin in their regime change neocon approach. I might note that Bernie did vote no. There's plenty of bipartisan cooperation when it serves their campaign benefactors and personal self-interest in getting reelected. AOC's view is to ask the question, What if we cajoled and shamed and pressured these sheep to instead be accountable to the working class? What might be possible then? If you want proof that the myth of gridlock is just as hollow as all the other Washington fairy tales, look no further than the power wielded by one freshman member of Congress just because she was willing to go to Washington and be a friend to you rather than to the D.C. elites. That, to me, Sagar, is the most interesting thing about AOC.
Yeah.
Just one person who came and said, you know what, I'm not going to play these games. I'm going to take my case to the American public, and look at the massive impact that just this one freshman member of Congress has been able to have in 1 year.
It was a watershed moment because it actually speaks less to her talent and more to the failures of the Democratic Party.
Hollowed
If that makes
brokenness
sense.
of the whole thing.
It's not just AOC is a very good politician, but it's really just that their party, the establishment of both parties, is so hollow that it took a 28-year-old primary challenger to revive a populist, anti-establishment, working-class sentiment of the Democratic Party, which allegedly already was that way. And the media, so much of the media, all these people grew up in the 70s, the 80s. All these politics have been dormant now for years. That's why we really see a return and a resurgence of history. And that's kind of how I look at AOC and really at Trump. I think both of them were reckoning outside forces that came in, and there's no mistake about why they are media darlings. Because for all of a sudden, it's like a new thing that's been brought to Washington, and you're right to highlight, which is that she faces the most difficult thing, because the chamber of the House is one built on seniority and about congeniality. You have to go along to get along.
Yep.
That's what Sam Rayburn used to say. And it's like, you got to keep your mouth shut in order to, climb up the dais and become a committee chairman. And she's like, no, I reject that transactional, incrementalization of politics, and I'm going to put outside pressure from within. That hasn't happened in a very long time.
Well, and there is a cost to be paid. We should be clear.
Cost.
There's a massive trade-off here, which is, when she wants to get something stuck in a bill for her district, not going to happen. When she wants the committee positions that she thinks would be best, not going to happen. But her belief, I think, which is my belief, is that by refusing to go along with that sort of horse trading and doing what you have to do to suck up to leadership, she is doing a massive service, not just to her district and the people in her district, but to the country as a whole. And that's essentially what's happened, is because each of these people is acting in their individual day-to-day best interest, it ends up with everybody getting sold down across the country.
Yeah, it really does. I think about, because you really have to go back in time to even find some allegories. Like a guy like Hubert Humphrey. He was famous for these civil rights speeches. When he got to Congress, the Southern Democrat racists who control the Senate, they didn't speak to him for 3 years.
Wow.
He said he used to cry. He'd literally cry tears, a powerful man in the United States Senator, famous all across the world. He would cry because they would reject him. But all the time, he was fighting for civil rights. That shows you the actual personal cost, that if you were going to have a real anti-establishment, actually fight for some people, you're going to pay a massive personal cost in Washington. So we should highlight, really what it takes in order to take that ground. It's
and they will
difficult.
find every excuse they can to rip her to shreds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Anything that they can use to weaponize against her, both parties absolutely will. And it's easy to trivialize, being uncomfortable, making people uncomfortable, not having friends among your colleagues, but that's a very human thing. It's very lonely. That can be a very hard thing to handle. So it's incredible to have her example out there, and makes you realize just what's possible if you didn't just have a handful, maybe you had 20, maybe you had 30, maybe you had 50, what could be possible in that world.
Yeah.
Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.